Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Eco Voices. Today, we will be hearing from Kait Vargas on what it means to live a lifestyle that reduces conflict between humans and wildlife, as well as the importance of building community and making environmental content accessible to all. They're incredible. So, without further ado, here's Eco Voices, Episode 5. I am so excited today to have on an incredible guest. I have Kait here, who is, and I wrote this down because you had quite a bio and I wanted to make sure I got it. You are not only my fellow Youth Advisory Congress member for the Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit, shout out. Kait, you're also an Earth Echo Water Challenge ambassador and a fierce protector and defender of all things sea turtles and conservation. Kait, welcome to Eco Voices.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be able to be a part of this awesome podcast.
I am so excited. So I floated around this idea in I think 2 meetings ago for the Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit. Um I just kind of said, "Hey, if anybody wants to be on it." And Kait, I was hoping you were going to say yes because you are a wealth of knowledge. You're also just super cool. And so selfishly, I was like, I really hope she says yes. And you did. So thank you, thank you, thank you for taking the time out of your clearly very busy life saving the world. Um, Kait, I always start off by asking these awesome guests if you could just tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a partly part of a youth advocacy group. I also do a lot of work in activism, but I spend a lot of time specifically doing work with animal husbandry, rehabilitation work, especially, and just kind of conservation education, making sure that we can work with our local communities to get them knowledgeable about our local flora and fauna, ways that they can get involved with helping. And I'm a very, very big uh, passionate about conservation education, not only, but community conservation. I like to call it more community science versus citizen science, just because we have such a diversity of people. I am from the Houston area, so I grew up with people from all over the world, really. And so being able to kind of help not only in giving that knowledge, but making that knowledge accessible for people, making sure that we have it in like different languages or for people who might be visually impaired and things like that. I'm also very, very passionate about accessibility when it comes to our knowledge, because I feel like just education is the fundamental thing we need to be focusing on when it comes to anything environmental related. As long as we can get people, we can give them resources, they can be better informed and make better informed decisions.
I love that. There are so many different directions we can go. That was amazing. So, you know what? I want to go back to the beginning. I want to know for you personally, what was the catalyst? What was that moment or that period of your life where you thought, you know what? I want to get into conservation and environmental activism. What was that inspiration like for you to pursue this path?
Oh boy, I think my story is a little different just because I started out wanting to go into marine biology when I was 6 years old. My parents, they took me on a trip to the Texas State Aquarium here in Corpus Christi. And so I was able to visit, and it just totally changed my life. I was able to see so many different species, and like one of the first times I got to see sea turtles, which to me was just like mind-boggling. I was like, wow, okay, this is amazing. And I was lucky enough that I've always been a very kind of sponge. I love learning, especially about anything related to wildlife. So I was really lucky in the fact that some of the marine biologists who worked at the Tech State Aquarium were able to like talk to me and answer some of my questions. And I was just, wow, these people are so cool. Like you get to be here and work here every day. This sounds like my dream. And I kind of just never stopped from there. Then it became my world revolved around everything ocean conservation. I remember in third grade, we got this project where we had to pick your favorite inventor, and we had this like long list of inventors that we got to choose from and do like a whole poster presentation on them. And I remember there was like an inventor who was like some engineer that did something that my dad did that my dad knew about. And he was like, I can help you with that if you want to do that. Like, I know about this guy. And then I saw Jacques Cousteau, and it said he was the inventor of scuba. And I was like, I think that's the one. I think that's the one for
Sorry,
me.
Dad, you're out of here.
Yeah, unfortunately, that kind of ended up being the rest of their lives as my parents. My dad's an engineer, and my mom, she worked in the medical fields. They were always hoping I would turn out to be an engineer or go into medicine. My sister went on to do biomedical field, and I was like, well, I love fish. I'm sorry. So I think after that, just kind of any chance I got in school, no matter what the project was, we were given like history class, English class, it didn't matter. I somehow turned it into any chance to do more investigation and like Google research into anything environmental related. And that's kind of what I became known for, is like just the local environmental advocate. So it's kind of where my reputation began.
I love that. So it's you knew your passion. It hit you at a young age. And I have to say on a side note, okay, I feel like there are a couple of the dream careers we all have when we're young. Can we just agree that the marine biology path is elite? I didn't even go into that, but something about like I feel like when you're kids, it's a couple different things that everybody wants to be. And the coolest kids always wanted to be the marine biologist. So Kate, you're so real for that. Um, I love that. And so you were kind of talking about different projects and how you always ended up um pursuing anything that could allow kind of, as you said, your sponge self to soak up more and more knowledge about your passion. And so I think that's a cool segue to your work with Earth Echo. Um, can you tell us a little bit about Earth Echo and how you got into there, how you were able to become a water challenge ambassador?
Yeah, so Earth Echo, it's actually a funny story. Um, Earth Echo, I've known about for quite a while because of their youth engagement director, Sean Russell. He was actually one of my coordinators when I was on a different council. And so it was really through Sean, who has always been a super, super incredible supporter of my career, like has known me since I was probably about 16, and really helped, get me established and feel like I had a place at the table. And so I didn't really have much connection to Earth Echo. I knew of it only because of Sean and because he worked with Philippe Cousteau, who is the grandson of Jacques Cousteau. And to me, I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. I fangirled about it all the time. I would always tell him I was so jealous. He even one time in college, he FaceTimed me as a surprise, and it was actually Philippe Cousteau saying hello to me. So
Whoa.
that I almost cried. I almost cried. I was having like a full breakdown, just full circle moment. And I didn't really get to do anything with Earth Echo until recently. I heard they had a water challenge ambassador position opening. They were hiring their new round. And so I got really invested in the work that they were doing because of my previous experience kind of doing sea turtle work was really what pushed me into marine biology, because I really went to school for wildlife and fisheries sciences, but it wasn't really until like my senior year that I started getting to do more work with fish and in the actual ocean. And so I learned about really like the full circle between the ecosystem, how our water quality is going to directly affect, the health of sea turtles. And so to me, I kind of had that full circle moment where I was like, every single aspect of what we do in our field is critical. It's all connected. And I really wanted to learn more about it. And so when I heard about the water challenge program that they had and how they really tried to bring in communities to get them invested and informed and encourage them to implement projects that are going to benefit their local waterways. I was sold immediately because that's what I love to do is I love working with my community. I love teaching them things. I love teaching them how to be better stewards of their environment. And so through them, I have been able to organize cleanups of, we had actually one event recently, the weekend before Earth Day.
Mm.
We did a bog cleanup and water testing event at my old high school. And we have like a bog that is in a detention basin at our school. And it's surrounded by like parking lots and sidewalks. And just in the middle of this little detention basin is this little bog. And that detention basin actually during Hurricane Harvey is what held up so much of the water and prevented our school from really being just devastated by the floods because our area was really heavily affected by Hurricane Harvey, really heavily affected, unfortunately. And so we were able to kind of show the kids the importance of why we want to test the quality of the water because not only is this going to connect to Buffalo Bayou, which is going to go out to Galveston Bay, not only is it connected throughout there, but we have also got protected species that are now making habitat at this local bog. I have a friend, a colleague of mine, Skylar Nix, who started a Purple Martin project where they built houses. And so now there's bird houses right outside of the bog, and these martins will come and nest every spring. And so they're able to see how we're able to see how not only there are different parts of the bog that are different water quality levels because of the runoff that comes from parking lots and because of the plants that are growing within that bog, those riparian systems that are helping filter out those pollutants and contaminants. So they're being able to learn about the importance of all of these different aspects and how it connects back to not only the health of flora and fauna at the bog, but how it connects to the health of Galveston Bay and Texas in general. And so it's really awesome to be able to do these projects because I feel like a lot of times these little pieces, they are part of such a bigger picture, and we don't always focus enough on how our small actions actually come out to affect more and more community members, land, oceans, waterways. It has an effect in everything we do. And so being able to do that work with Earth Echo has been really inspiring, encouraging. Being able to work with young people and community members is just a dream come true.
It sounds like that position was tailor-made to you. Just perfect for your passion. And something I love, Kate, is kind of you referring to deep ecology as a necessary part of how we move forward and hope, fingers crossed, kind of move forward and thrive and find a healthy, sustainable future in which we know how to be, like you said, good stewards, is understanding that full circle picture that what you do here is going to affect this, which is going to affect this. And I know that we learned about different ecological processes in school processes. But I think that that's lost sometimes on people if it's not your specialty or if you get distracted, well, I need to make money or I need to do this. And so what I really am curious about as well, Kate, is as someone who you have that experience and that passion with, rolling your sleeves up and getting involved in the community. My question, which I'm going to get out right now, is how do we engage the local community? How do we get people to really tap into that deep passion of, oh wait, yeah, you're right. I'm a part of this ecosystem and what's the Kate secret? What does that look like?
So I I feel like I personally found the secret when I did my work with Texas Sea Grant. So when I was with Texas Sea Grant, we worked on an informal research project to learn about the incidental capture of sea turtles by recreational fisheries in Texas. And so it was, there's not a lot of research on this topic just in general, especially in Texas. And so it was very much just fundamentals, like just the base of where are turtles being captured? Like, what knowledge can we get from locals? What do they already know? What information are they lacking so that we can maybe create resources that are able to help them in the future whenever they have these interactions? And they actually had me going out every other weekend. I was in College Station, which is where Texas Sea Grant's headquarters is, and I spent about 11 months uh, going out every other weekend for 4 days to Corpus Christi, Port Aransas, and just literally not only like going out to all of these different spots that I know are like popular fishing spots, but just working one-on-one, literally like walking and talking to people that I'm seeing on the piers fishing, walking past them and just asking, "Hi, do you have some time today to talk about sea turtles?" And that's really truly what I learned was people appreciate when you go and talk to them and just one-on-one get to know them, get to know their passions, get to know their lives, because for me it was completely monumental because originally going into this project, I came into it because I understood that we were having an issue in Texas where we're having these interactions with marine life, especially sea turtles, where people just don't know the proper response. We're having lots of folks who are trying to remove hooks from sea turtles on their own that they're accidentally capturing, and they have no idea that it's illegal, or there are people who just catch turtles and don't know that it's illegal at all for them to touch them because we have so many tourists coming in from different parts of Texas, from even different countries that are coming to Corpus Christi. And so I learned that very quickly it's so important to try to understand the people out there and their reasons for why they're doing things, because it's not always malicious intent. And so that's what I found personally. I felt like personally, I felt like some of the signage that has already been placed was kind of more aggressive and perhaps might not encourage folks to call whenever they do accidentally capture sea turtles because of fear of getting in trouble or getting fined. And I personally found that talking with folks one-on-one and letting them know exactly why there are fines in the first place, why is it a bad thing to do? And for me, it was not as difficult to do that because I'd been on the other end. I've done sea turtle rehabilitation when I was able to intern at the Texas Sea Life Center in Corpus Christi. And so I have seen the turtles that come in with hooks and lines. I've had to cut some sea turtles out of channels that were wrapped up in line that was just left behind. And so coming from that experience, seeing that side of things, and then also working with the people who are fishing every single day, people who maybe catch sea turtles pretty often, and they know where the turtles are. They're able to communicate with other people about how we're supposed to handle that, or they might have their own opinions about how they want to handle it. And so kind of learning about why individuals make the choices they do and being on grounds, like on the front lines, because whenever we make that legislation, it's important to understand how it's truly applied in these areas where we want betterment, but are we ensuring that there is actual improvement once the legislation has been passed? Once we make these rules, are we making sure that it is actually beneficial and it is actually helping the way that we want it to help, or helping it the way that it could best help? And so for me, it's one-on-one, working with the people, working with the individuals on ground in the field is the most important part to me, because you can't make really good policies without knowing how it's going to affect people who experience maybe those issues on a day-to-day basis.
I love that so much because I think in this beautiful, crazy scramble that those of us in the environmental movement are in to get the message out and to make change and to do all this, I think sometimes it's really easy to forget that there's someone standing, 5 feet away from you, it's exactly what you said, knowing who you serve, knowing who you live with, knowing who you do community with is such a key um to bringing people in. I like and saying it out loud, I'm like, duh, like it makes total sense, but I don't think it's something that one can always think about when they're kind of deep in this work is maybe if I just stand back and focus on building community and kind of at the same time being focused on, for instance, the unique areas that I'm focused on, that's how you really make a difference is through relationship building. I love that so much. And I also, you brought up something about obviously, you do incredible work. You're a scientist. And so you're naturally, I think, you've spoken about data, about collecting data, that doing work that's data driven. And what role does data play in your work? And how do you use that information to drive conservation efforts?
I think data is really important because it's kind of how we track change, right? And for me, I think about it in terms of, and this might be like off on a tangent, but I think about in terms of whenever I was at A&M, I took classes in a teaching center where we had specimen that were preserved, right? And the understanding that I was given for why do we preserve specimen was to see changes over time, to track changes in morphology and see adaptations that might be taking place, maybe see the scale of evolution, right? And I think that it can be applied the same way through data, right? So data can tell us not only changes in our environment, looking at water quality changes from one area to the next, but data for me can also tell me, for example, in my project with Texas Sea Grant, data that I looked at was differences between locals and non-locals, seeing if certain areas maybe had more people who were tourists than locals, and then finding out what knowledge they had already based on that. So I think data is so crucial to seeing and tracking changes and improvements, or even, moving backwards, seeing where we're seeing, things go wrong. And I think that data can also, as I'm sure you remember from Gulf of Mexico Youth Climate Summit, data can also reveal inequities in knowledge. And so I think that when we talk about data, it's not only important to think about, specifically like research raw data, but the data and knowledge that we can find ourselves through our own work outside of research or institutions.
I love that idea that data is not only, it doesn't need to only be viewed in the way of, it's a scientist in a laboratory, maybe what we think when we're kids, but that it can actually be used to help us better understand ourselves, better understand our communities, point out environmental injustices. And so this is totally a tangent from what I was originally gonna ask you, but let's say somebody wanted to get involved in really, and this is a very broad question, but any sort of environmental topic, whether it pertained to environmental justice, biodiversity, conservation, anything like that, and they wanted to get started with research, just them wanting to do something. You have so much experience with this already that what would your words of advice be to that person? Where do you start if you have that goal, that desire?
My start would be looking for organizations that are already doing the work. And I think this is something that's really important for our field, especially because there is a lot of good work out there that already exists. However, we don't always have the awareness of those projects. And so amplifying those projects, amplifying the voices of the people involved in those projects, making sure that we have people who have resources to go to. I think that's my word of advice is looking for organizations that are already doing the how do I get involved in conservation, because that's really what it was for me. Was I started looking for, because as I mentioned, I was 6 years old and I was like, I want to be a marine biologist. Well, okay, what do I do now? And for me, it was just, okay, I'm gonna spend every school project I can. I remember specifically like world history class, we would have to do a current event project every week, every single current event, climate, environment, anything ocean related, every single week.
Mm.
That's what I would do. And so really taking the time to invest yourself in those topics and try to bring those topics to your family members, get them invested. My family knows so much more about plastic than they need to all the time. Every holiday, they're holding up a cup. Is this one we can recycle? I
Yep.
know you know. I don't know, but I know you know.
Mm.
And so making sure that we have like these resources and that we're kind of being the not necessarily like spokesperson like Lorax,
Yeah.
I speak for the trees, but being a resource, having enough time to take the time to talk to people who have questions. I think that's a really big thing for me. I feel like so much of what I learned came from talking to other people who had questions about the work I was doing and why I was doing it. And I had to kind of take time to be like, that is a really good question. Let me look into that. I would like to learn more about how to answer that better. And so that's really what I would be giving advice for is working with other organizations that have resources already, taking the time in your everyday life to try to bring these topics in your everyday life with your friends and family, and just working with community members is going to be the most important thing. Be a resource for your community once you have that knowledge.
So amplify and specialize. Use your voice to amplify the good work being done and then specialize yourself. You blew my mind, Kait, when you said make yourself a resource. I think a lot of times we think resources are to be supported, resources are to be used. Um, but I think we very rarely as a society think, well, I could become a resource for that couple on the beach in Texas, where I go up and say, do you have a minute to talk about sea turtles? You are the resource. You are literally the change. And I think that's deeply profound and something that's honestly really going to serve as an encouragement to me. So thank you so much for that genius wisdom. Kait, now it's time to really get into it. It's time to talk about sea turtles.
Oh,
All
yes.
right. It's been long enough. It's time to get into it. So I think that sea turtles and polar bears are like the two animal faces of climate change, right? You hear people who maybe aren't overly involved in the movement saying, "Oh, the polar bears," or "Don't have that straw because you're gonna kill a turtle, kill a sea turtle," right? Um, they've become mainstream, which I think it's great because they're being talked about. But I think I have a feeling, Kait, you can take us a little deeper on sea turtles. So before we get into the specificities, what is it about sea turtles? And actually, I wrote this down because I loved it so much. Okay, when I first texted you when we were like, let's film this, I literally have your quote here. You said, "Okay, but I have to warn you, once you get me talking about turtles, it's hard to stop."
It's true.
I love it. That's the perfect text just to show your passion. And so I want you to talk about it and you don't have to stop talking about it. What what was that what was that love moment when you were like, oh man, I love these beautiful creatures?
Oh boy. So, oh gosh, there's so much that goes into this. Like you need to understand that like I am the turtle girl in my family. I every gift ever, every holiday, just like little turtle everything, turtle notebooks, little turtle statues, turtle pillow pets, turtle posters, everything turtle. That was me as a child. And it was again because of that trip when we went to Corpus Christi.
Mm.
And I remember so vividly being able to feed some sea turtles. We were throwing in lettuce, and I remember being able to feed them. And I just remember so clearly learning about how they were in danger and knowing that we needed to help them. And that was just like the only thing in my mind was just how do we help these sea turtles? What do I need to do to help sea turtles? And I became just like obsessed with absorbing as much knowledge as possible about these creatures. And when I tell you obsessed, I mean my family and I, we grew up in the Southwest,
Mm.
Houston.
Mhm.
So we're about an hour and a half drive from the ocean. But when I tell you that every time I got the chance and every time I could, I was going to Galveston to visit. They had back in the day, this I don't think the facility exists anymore, but they had a NOAA facility where they did the Jump Start project where they were raising these young sea turtles. And I remember any chance I got, I was trying to go out there to visit the sea turtles and see their facilities. And any chance I got, I was trying to go out to seminars that they would hold at A&M Galveston. And I remember specifically this one trip where I went with my sister, and I was probably about, I want to say I was like 9 years old. And I went to the NOAA facility. I remember seeing a turtle excluder device for the first time. They had a really big one just laid out on the ground where you could just walk alongside it and really see how it would look spread out in the water. And I remember seeing all of the young sea turtles that were being raised, and I spoke to a woman there. I can't remember her name, but I spoke to a woman there and I told her about how I wanted to be a marine biologist. And this was the point where I made my first email because I wanted to give her a contact, which my first email ever at 9 years old was turtle with a Z 614 at gmail.com. That was my first email. And I used
I
that
love it.
professionally in
Do
high
you?
school as well. I did. I did. I try not to anymore. I try to be a little more professional.
I think it's time to dust it off one last time. I wish I would have sent the Zoom invite to that. That would been amazing.
Oh yeah, but I reached out to her and I let her know I was really invested in marine biology and wanting to learn about sea turtles. And she was kind enough to actually let me have access to their hospital. And she took me and my sister into like this little room in the back. And for the first time in my life, I saw sea turtles in a hospital. And I remember seeing specifically like turtles with their limbs missing or small little babies and some that had like only like nubs and things like that. They had all kinds of injuries to their shell from boat propellers. And there I even remember seeing one that was actually like a different color than normal. And I didn't really understand why, very young. But just so many different, ailments for these animals. And it was very hard to swallow at first. And my next kind of point was, well, what do I need to learn so that I can come help? What do I need to do so that we can try to maybe lessen the number of patients that come into this hospital or lessen the severity of the illnesses that they're dealing with? And from then on, I was just all about sea turtle rehab and wanting to learn about what we as beach goers should be doing to better their lives, which for me really started out with reducing plastic and making sure that every single time I went to the beach that we left nothing behind, that we left it just like it was when we got there. and trying to reduce plastic bag use as much as I could. Trying to reduce any kind of plastic use was a really big one. Recycling, reusing. That was when I really became that like environmental justice person, because I kind of realized like I can actually do things that are going to better their lives. I can actually make a difference and I can teach other people about it. And I really learned the teaching part of it came from the fact that my family is actually from Colombia.
Hmm.
And so
What part of Colombia?
oh, they're from Boyacá. They're from this
Okay.
little town called Duitama.
Hmm.
It's like I think I want to say it's like a couple hours from Bogota, like 3 hours
Awesome.
from Bogota. But
Wonderful.
my parents immigrated
Mm.
from Colombia like in the 80s.
Okay.
And most of our family is still over there and we'd visit pretty often. And so because I grew up in Houston, really the only like nature experiences I got here were if I went to the Houston Zoo or if I went to like Galveston. And that was about as much nature as I got to see in Houston. But when I'd go out to Colombia, my God, it is beautiful.
Mm.
And there are so many gorgeous sights to see and so much wildlife. And I remember like we went on this trip to Barranquilla. We
Hmm.
went to Parque Tayrona. It's a national park in like the very northern part of Colombia. And there was this place where you can go where the river meets the ocean and you can see the meeting place of these two things. And I was so young, but I was so taken aback by how beautiful it all was. And it just made absolutely no sense to me why like so many people, especially like, friends and family members were just not like completely like, oh my God, this is amazing, this is beautiful. How are you not as invested in wanting to protect this as I am? And so that was like my main driver was like, I want to learn things so that I can like translate it and I can tell my family about it because I want them to know too, because they have so much beautiful nature and
Hmm.
they should know about it. They should know how to protect it. And that was like my main driver as a kid was really just wanting to educate my family members about it.
That is definitely what you're saying is something that I think so many people here in Miami, where I'm from, can relate to. That's why when you said you're from Colombia, I was like, where? Because I literally have a ton of friends that are from Colombia, um and I love that you bring that up. And in fact, that was actually something I was going to ask you because I was totally stalking your LinkedIn, just being honest. And I saw that, and correct me if this is wrong, but I saw that you're a Spanish speaking operator for the Sea Turtle Stranding and Salvage Network hotline. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I volunteer with the Gulf Center for Sea
Mhm.
Turtle Research as a hotline operator, and I'm one of their Spanish speakers. So if they have anyone who speaks Spanish, they can always reach out to me, and I can try to translate any information for them.
I love that because I do think that I definitely know. I wish I had the stats here. I don't, but I know that the a lot of the content, the environmental content being put out is in English worldwide. There's definitely a gap. And so for you, how does language accessibility kind of contribute to conservation efforts? Why is that so important that people could hear and really digest in Spanish?
Well, I'm actually really glad that you brought up this point because this is something that I'm really, really passionate about because it's something that really you can really see on the Texas coast when it comes to um, like the sea turtle world, especially. So in like the Texas coast, we kind of have a lot of Spanish speakers from like Corpus Christi area, like south. There's a lot of heavy Spanish speaking. And then like Houston up north, there's a lot of actually Vietnamese speaking because there's a large population of Vietnamese shrimpers and fishermen. And so this comes into direct play because if you are creating signage, say, to inform people if you accidentally catch a sea turtle, here's the phone number to call. Not only do you want to make sure that signage is accessible to the people who are coming in contact with the turtles, but you also want to make sure that there are people when they call that number, that there are people who are able to respond in the language. And so that is something that we kind of have an issue with, is because there's such a diversity of language, which is always a beautiful thing to see. But how are we able to make this knowledge accessible to so many people? And for me, in Spanish, this is of particular importance. And the reason for that is because the dialects in Spanish are so different. And so for me personally, I struggled a lot trying to translate material that I was working on into Spanish because of phrasing that we use or words that we use that are different or might have different significance. I mean, one of the more vulgar examples, if that's okay,
Go for
but
it. Go for it.
one of the more vulgar examples that I didn't really realize was in Colombia, a word that we use is like to pick something up.
Uh-huh.
We say coger. So when I was translating things, I put, don't pick up
Yeah.
the turtle
Yeah.
in Spanish, but in Mexico, coger has a much more intimate meaning.
Yes, it does.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
things like that where it's like you might not realize the change in meaning from one country to the next. And so
Mhm.
that's something that's really important to consider. And then especially when it comes to, like I said, accessibility to the people who might be interacting with the animals. Well, it's obviously understood that we have a large population of Mexicans here in Texas and people who speak dialects from Mexico.
Yeah.
But does that necessarily mean that the people who are out fishing on our coast, not only on commercial fisheries, but just fishing along on piers and on beaches, their dialects, what are we seeing more of? So, what is the primary type of wording we should be using? Because there's so much difference for even trying to say bait. There's so many different ways to say it depending on what region you're from. So, making sure that you have words that are going to be understood by a majority of people, even though it's the same language, it's not going to have the same meaning.
It kind of that brought up in my mind that part of climate justice, part of environmental justice is how we use language. And I think, Kate, I feel like I can relate to you kind of on the state level of, you being Texas, me being Florida, particularly South Florida. Um, yeah, kind of just both South Florida. There is such a gorgeous diversity to the populations where we live, and that's such a gift. But it makes it tricky because I think that sometimes the places where, or I'm not going to say the places, but I think sometimes people may live in areas in the States where it's okay. They just don't really have as many people from different areas, different countries. It's just how it happens. But I think the problem is that then that content gets generated and there's a disconnect because for people like me and you, we know, hey, this has got to be translated. It was normal for me in Miami, it was normal growing up and seeing signs in three or four languages, English, Spanish, Creole. Like that was very normal. And like you said, not only with different Spanish speakers from different regions, but also with Vietnamese individuals. Um, and so yeah, you just had me thinking about the fact that if we want equitable policies moving forward, that means including everybody, not just having white Americans, right, a seat at the table. And so that means showing up in the different languages. And like you said, you made it even more specific. That means the regions. There are so many words that I didn't realize until I started speaking to people from other countries were different. Like growing up being Cuban American, I was taught that like what you would call like a bus that you would travel on was la guagua. Like that was just a slang. And then I lived in Quito, I lived in Ecuador, and Wawa was like a little child. And I was so confused at first. I was like, what are they talking about these buses? Like they're kids. And so that was a total tangent, but I love what you said about that specificity is needed. And so you know, I'm curious, kind of jumping back to the sea turtles, because I don't want to rob you of talking about that more. Kate, what's something or some things you would like people to know about sea turtles that they may not know, kind of generally speaking, or maybe that they got wrong? What do we need to know in order to protect and honor sea turtles?
I think that some of the most, I think, like striking things I found whenever going out and talking to people one on one was that a lot of people actually are not aware that sea turtles have lungs and breathe air. I think this is something that maybe it's just because you don't like think too deeply about it. It's just like an animal in the water must breathe water, but it is something that is actually very, very important because if you have, say, a situation in which a sea turtle is in danger and needs to be rescued, if there are people who are on the scene who are trying to assist, and they may not have the correct knowledge or information, they may mistakenly try to keep that turtle underwater, thinking that they're helping it breathe better. But in the reality, they are actually going to be drowning that animal.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and so it's like little things like that where it's like, oh, you might not think that it's so, deep, but it is actually when it comes down to if that person is trying to help, if they have the incorrect information, they can actually cause more harm than good. And that was part of the same reason with why they made it illegal to remove hooks from sea turtles because of the fact that if you have that incorrect knowledge, you can cause a lot more harm, especially to sea turtles who have ingested those hooks. Trying to remove the hooks not only can cause more damage to the animal and even, cause damage inside of their
Mhm.
bodies that could be irreparable or may even cause them to be in captivity for the rest of their lives, but you could also get bit. I mean, these guys, their beaks are some of their species, they're built to crush clams and mollusks. So they very well could take out your fingers. So making sure people are informed in that sense so they are not injuring themselves when trying to assist if they choose to do so. Um, and also just kind of one of the really, really big things for me was people would often get kind of upset at the fact that they were being told to call the hotline rather than assist themselves. But it was because of this knowledge that I have of understanding that people aren't all informed in the same way. We don't all have the same education. We just don't. We come from different places. We come from different upbringings. We even come from different values. And so what one person might be fully knowledgeable about and they may feel confident in helping, another person may not. And so making sure they understand that while we appreciate people wanting to help, that the reason is because unfortunately there is just a deficit in information. There is a lack of education surrounding these issues that could lead to more harm. And so that was one of the bigger things that I really realized during my time there.
Wow. That's so I have to be honest. I did not know that sea turtles have lungs. I think it's exactly what you said. You assume, well, they live underwater, then, but that's so true that sometimes the best help you can be is using your voice to advocate. So picking up the phone, calling, saying, hey, this happened, and then trusting that there are people like you, Kate, who this is your passion. This is what, like you said, you're trained, you're educated, you know what to do. So maybe the best thing that we can do as environmental stewards is if this isn't your area of expertise, there's really no shame in that. You could totally save a life, um, but save a life by dialing the hotline instead of trying to help in a way that, yeah, maybe you're just not trained in. And so, Kate, I want to respect your time, so I've got two questions left for you.
Yeah, no worries.
One is, and these two are really like meta and introspective. So yeah, no pressure. But all that you're doing, your incredible initiatives, your passion that you've had since you were really young, and it's beautiful to see that that like invisible string theory, just how everything throughout your life has kind of taken you to where you are now to be such a champion for sea turtles and for, other parts of conservation. At the end of the day, what is your hope for the work that you're doing? What do you hope that you achieve in the future through these initiatives?
Well, in terms of sea turtle work, um, because like I said, what we did in our project with Texas Sea Grant, it was a very like informal project, very just like base level, what knowledge do we want to amplify? Um, I really, for in terms of sea turtles, my goal is to be able to go back to school and to actually do formal research on incidental capture because I want to know, like I said, I want to know more about how we can better resources. Like I mentioned before, data would tell us what types of languages are mostly used to the people who are interacting with sea turtles. Data will tell us where these interactions are happening. The data will tell us what knowledge do they not have. And so being able to understand that better and have the funding and the resources to create that knowledge, to put up that signage, to make more flyers and make more informational, maybe even workshops, or have people who are monitoring piers to be a resource to folks who might accidentally catch sea turtles, especially during holiday seasons where we have so many tourists and so many more people together in these areas where sea turtles make their habitat. And so my really dream is to be able to help my community here in Texas with incidental capture and try to lessen those numbers and increase education and awareness for sea turtle conservation, especially because I feel like it's so overlooked that Texas is the state of Texas sea turtle, the Kemp's Ridley, and it's the story of how these species nearly went extinct. And because of the great conservation efforts of so many incredible biologists, that these animals were able to be brought back essentially from the brink of extinction. And so being able to do that type of work and continuing, because now, we're not so worried about them going extinct. Now we have different issues to focus on. And so kind of being able to continue that work and respect all of the incredible things that these scientists did during their time helping sea turtles and kind of move towards focusing on the new issues of our generation and how we can really help solve those problems now. And in terms of, my career in general is mostly the same thing. My dream is to encourage young people who might, go on a trip to the aquarium and decide they want to save the earth. And I think that's the most important thing is working with young kids. I mean, I remember so many times working with young kids and talking to them about, what I do. And I remember one young girl telling me that she wanted to become president so that she could make 100 laws to protect wildlife. And she was
Mhm.
only like 6 or 7 years old. And so my really passion and goal and dream is to create a world in which young people feel like they have a seat at the table and that they're not alone in the fight, because I feel like so much of the past couple of decades has been like Gen Z will save us, the kids will save us, but I want them to know that like they're not the only generation that's in this fight. It's not just them. They have resources. They have so many people who are passionate about wanting better for them and wanting to amplify their voices and just create the next generation of conservation warriors. So that's my dream.
That is a beautiful dream. I see it coming true already. I love that you are being and will be the person that inspired little you. That's pretty sacred. That's beautiful. And so my last question, Kate, I ask everybody I talk to, which is if you could give one call to action to listeners right now, what would that be?
Community. My call to action is that we need to work collectively organizations need to work together in terms of creating policy. Organizations should work together and individuals should work together on community levels. You know, work with your neighbors, work with your classmates, work with your friends, your family members. Don't be afraid to ask, hey, do you want to come with me to a cleanup? Hey, would you be interested in joining my environmental club? Don't be afraid or ashamed or feel like you need to do this on your own, because it's a community, it's a collective problem, and every action we have is going to have a either positive or negative impact on the people around us. And so I think my biggest call to action is remember your community whenever you go out and do the research you do or do the work that you do. Remember where you started and remember why you're doing that work and who you're doing it for.
What a gift to be able to hear from Kait about all things environmental activism, sea turtle conservation, and ways to help preserve our beautiful world. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time here on Eco Voices.